Sometimes the thing that hurts you most is not the person who left, not the friend who changed, not the love that became cold, and not the dream that broke in your hands. Sometimes the real pain comes from the part of you that keeps holding on after life has already shown you the truth. You know they do not value you the same way. You know the situation is draining your peace. You know your heart becomes heavy every time you wait, expect, remember, compare, and hope again. But still, something inside you refuses to release it, because attachment makes the painful familiar feel safer than the unknown freedom waiting ahead. The Vedas warned that attachment is not love. Attachment is when your happiness becomes tied to something that was never fully in your control. And the moment your peace depends on someone's attention, someone's behavior, someone's approval, or someone's presence, you stop living from your soul and start living like a prisoner of fear. If this message reaches your heart, stay until the end, because these 7 lessons may help you understand why your attachment is stealing your happiness and how ancient Vedic wisdom teaches you to return to yourself. Lesson 1. Attachment begins when you forget your own soul. The Vedas remind us that the deepest truth of a human being is not found in what they possess, who loves them, who leaves them, who praises them, or who chooses them. The deepest truth is the soul, the quiet inner presence that existed before every relationship, before every desire, before every wound, before every name the world placed upon you. But attachment begins the moment a person forgets this sacred truth and starts believing that their happiness lives outside them, in someone's attention, in someone's affection, in someone's approval, in one dream, one memory, one result, or one person who has become larger in their mind than their own inner peace. This is why attachment is so painful. It does not only make you miss someone, it makes you forget yourself. It slowly convinces you that without this person, without this situation, without this outcome, your life will become empty. It whispers that your worth depends on being chosen, your peace depends on being remembered, your joy depends on being loved in the exact way you expect, and your future depends on something that was never fully under your control. And once the mind accepts this illusion, the soul becomes covered by fear. A person who forgets the soul begins to live like a beggar in front of the world. They beg for replies, they beg for loyalty, they beg for attention, they beg for closure, they beg for the past to return, they beg for people to become again what they once appeared to be. And the tragedy is that the more they beg, the more their inner dignity becomes weak, because attachment makes a person kneel before what should only have been a temporary part of their journey. The Vedic sages understood that the world is full of changing forms. People come and go, emotions rise and fall, relationships shift, promises break, desires change their shape, the body ages, the mind moves, circumstances turn, and nothing outside the soul remains fixed forever. But when the mind is attached, it fights against the natural movement of life. It says, this must stay, this must be mine, this must not change, this person must love me, this dream must happen, this memory must return. And because life does not obey the demands of attachment, the heart suffers again and again. But the soul does not suffer in the same way the mind suffers. The mind suffers because it clings. The ego suffers because it wants control. The heart suffers because it remembers, but the soul remains deeper than all of this. The soul is not destroyed when someone leaves. The soul is not reduced when someone rejects you. The soul is not made worthless because one person failed to understand your value. The soul does not become incomplete because a chapter ended. It only becomes hidden when the mind becomes too noisy with attachment. That is why the first lesson is not simply let go. The first lesson is remember who you are. Because if you try to let go while still believing that your happiness depends on what you lost, letting go will feel impossible. But when you remember that your soul is already whole, letting go becomes natural. You stop seeing release as punishment. You start seeing it as returning to yourself. You stop thinking, I am losing everything. You begin to understand, I am losing what made me forget myself. Attachment says, without them, I am broken. Wisdom says, I was whole before them, and I remain whole after them. Attachment says, if they leave, my happiness is gone. Wisdom says, if they leave, my lesson remains, my soul remains, my path remains, and my inner light remains. Attachment says, hold tighter. Wisdom says, hold truth higher. The Vedas guide the seeker back to the inner center, because a person who is rooted in the soul can love without becoming enslaved. They can care without losing dignity. They can miss someone without destroying themselves. They can grieve without forgetting their worth. They can accept change without believing that life has ended. This is not coldness. This is spiritual strength. This is the difference between a heart that loves from emptiness and a heart that loves from wholeness. So if your attachment is stealing your happiness, ask yourself a painful but powerful question. Have I made this person, this memory, or this desire more important than my own soul? Because the moment something outside you becomes more important than the peace within you, suffering begins. And the moment you return to your soul, suffering starts losing its power. You are not the relationship that failed. You are not the message that never came. You are not the person who did not choose you. You are not the memory that keeps hurting you. You are not the desire that keeps pulling you. You are the awareness behind all of it. You are the one who can watch the pain, learn from the pain, rise beyond the pain, and choose not to build a home inside the pain. Attachment begins when you forget your own soul, but freedom begins when you remember it again. And once you remember, truly remember, that your deepest happiness was never supposed to depend on someone else's changing heart, you begin to take your power back. Your mind becomes calmer, your heart becomes lighter, your dignity returns, your energy returns, your life returns, because the soul that remembers itself does not chase what breaks it. It blesses, it learns, it releases, and it walks back into its own light. Lesson 2. Attachment makes temporary things feel permanent. The Vedas teach that one of the deepest causes of human suffering is forgetting the changing nature of life. Everything in this world moves. The body moves from childhood to youth, from youth to age, from strength to weakness. Seasons move from heat to rain, from rain to cold, from cold to spring. Emotions move from excitement to silence, from closeness to distance, from hope to disappointment, from pain to healing. Even people move. The person who once could not sleep without speaking to you may one day become quiet. The person who once made promises may one day change their path. The dream that once felt certain may one day become uncertain. This is not always betrayal. Sometimes it is simply the law of change showing itself. But attachment does not accept this law. Attachment looks at something temporary and demands that it become permanent. It looks at a person and says, you must always feel the same. It looks at a relationship and says, you must never change. It looks at a beautiful moment and says, you must never end. It looks at a desire and says, you must become my whole life. And when life refuses to obey these demands, the heart breaks, not only because something changed, but because the mind was never prepared for change. This is why attachment steals happiness so quietly. At first it feels like love. It feels like devotion. It feels like loyalty. You tell yourself, I care deeply. You tell yourself, I am just sincere. You tell yourself, I do not want to lose what matters to me. But slowly, sincerity becomes fear, care becomes control, love becomes dependence, and hope becomes a chain around the mind. You stop enjoying what is present because you are afraid it might disappear. You stop feeling grateful because you are busy trying to protect the moment from change. You stop living fully because your heart is constantly asking, what if this does not last? The Vedic sages understood that suffering begins when the mind tries to freeze the river of life. A river is beautiful because it flows. If you try to hold the river in your hands, you do not keep the river, you only exhaust yourself. Life is the same. People, experiences, blessings, and emotions are like flowing water. They can refresh you, teach you, nourish you, and pass through your journey. But when you try to hold them with fear, they begin to hurt you, not because they were evil, but because you turned movement into possession. Many people are not suffering from the present moment. They are suffering from the demand that the present moment must never change. They are not only hurt because someone became distant, they are hurt because they expected that person to remain forever, as they were in the sweetest season. They are not only hurt because a dream did not happen, they are hurt because they had already built their identity around that dream. They are not only hurt because life took something away, they are hurt because attachment had whispered, "This is yours forever." But what in this world is truly yours forever? Your possessions can leave your hands, your beauty can fade, your strength can weaken, your praise can turn into criticism, your friendships can shift, your relationships can change, your plans can collapse, your status can disappear, your comfort can be disturbed. Even your own thoughts are not always under your command. The Vedas direct the seeker toward the eternal, because the temporary cannot carry the full weight of the soul's hunger. This does not mean you should stop loving people. It means you should stop demanding from people what only the divine truth within can give. Do not ask a changing person to become the unchanging foundation of your peace. Do not ask a temporary relationship to become the permanent source of your identity. Do not ask a passing moment to become the entire meaning of your life. When you place eternal expectations on temporary things, you create pain that no one outside you can heal. Attachment makes you believe, if this stays, I will be happy. Wisdom teaches, if I am rooted within, I can be happy even when things change. Attachment makes you believe, if this person changes, my life is finished. Wisdom teaches, if this person changes, my lesson changes, my path changes, but my soul is not finished. Attachment says hold on because you may never find peace again. Wisdom says release what is changing, because peace is not found by gripping the temporary with trembling hands. The painful truth is that many people are attached not to reality, but to the version of reality they created in their own mind. They are attached to the old version of someone. They are attached to the first days, the sweet words, the attention, the promises, the way things felt before everything became heavy. They keep loving a memory while suffering from the present. They keep hoping the old person will return, while ignoring the truth of who that person has become. They keep watering a dead season because they cannot accept that the season has ended. This is where the mind becomes trapped. It says, they were different before. It says, maybe they will come back. It says, maybe if I wait more, give more, forgive more, lose myself more, they will become the same again. But the Vedic path asks you to see clearly. Love should not make you blind to truth. Compassion should not make you a prisoner of illusion. Patience should not become an excuse to remain attached to what is already draining your spirit. Sometimes life changes something because your soul needs to grow beyond it. Sometimes a person becomes distant because your spirit was becoming too dependent on their presence. Sometimes a door closes because you were worshipping the door more than the path. Sometimes a relationship weakens because you had started placing your entire happiness in another human being's hands. What feels like loss may actually be life teaching you not to build your inner temple on moving sand. The Vedas do not teach that the world is useless. They teach that the world must be understood properly. Everything can teach you, but not everything is meant to stay with you. Everything can be loved, but not everything can be possessed. Everything can be enjoyed, but not everything can become your identity. The flower is beautiful because it blooms, but it will not remain the same forever. The sunset is beautiful because it appears for a moment, but you cannot command it to stay in the sky. A relationship may be beautiful, but if it changes, your soul must not collapse, as if life itself has ended. When attachment makes temporary things feel permanent, it also makes endings feel like death. A person leaves, and you feel as if your entire future has died. A chapter closes, and you feel as if your whole life has closed. A dream breaks, and you feel as if your worth has broken with it. But this is attachment speaking. Your life is larger than one chapter. Your worth is deeper than one person's choice. Your path is wider than one dream. Your soul is older than every temporary thing you are afraid to lose. The moment you understand impermanence, you begin to love differently. You become softer, but also wiser. You become grateful, but not desperate. You enjoy people, but you do not turn them into your emotional oxygen. You appreciate the moment, but you do not demand that it remain unchanged forever. You give love, but you do not destroy yourself when love is not returned in the same way. You allow life to move, and because you stop fighting movement, peace begins to return. A person with attachment says, "Please never change, because I do not know who I am without you." A person with wisdom says, "I honor your presence, but I will not lose my soul if your path changes." A person with attachment says, "I cannot accept this ending." A person with wisdom says, "I will feel the pain, but I will not make the pain my permanent home." A person with attachment says, "This was supposed to last forever." A person with wisdom says, "It lasted as long as it was meant to teach, shape, awaken, and refine me." This is not easy. The heart does not release in one moment what it held for a long time. The mind does not immediately stop searching for what once gave it comfort. Memories do not disappear simply because you understand wisdom, but understanding is the first light. Once you see that your pain is not only from what changed, but from your resistance to change, you begin to heal differently. You stop begging life to reverse itself. You stop arguing with reality. You stop asking the past to become the present again. You begin to breathe inside truth. The Vedas guide the seeker toward freedom through right understanding. If something is temporary, love it with awareness. If something is changing, hold it with open hands. If something is leaving, let it leave without believing your soul is leaving with it. If something ends, receive the lesson without turning the ending into your identity. This is how attachment weakens, not through hatred, not through bitterness, not through pretending you never cared. Attachment weakens when wisdom becomes stronger than fear. Your happiness was never meant to depend on something that life can remove. Your peace was never meant to be tied to someone's mood, someone's message, someone's promise, someone's presence, or someone's memory. These things may bring joy, but they cannot become the root of your existence. When they become the root, every change feels like destruction. But when your soul is rooted in truth, change may hurt you, but it will not destroy you. So when your heart says, "I cannot live without this," pause and ask, "Is this my soul speaking or my attachment?" When your mind says, "This must stay forever," pause and ask, "Am I loving this or am I trying to control life?" When your pain says, "Everything is over," pause and ask, "Is everything truly over or only one temporary chapter?" These questions are powerful because they bring awareness into the place where attachment was hiding. The Vedas warned that the person who depends on the temporary for permanent happiness will suffer again and again, because the temporary can never promise what the soul is seeking. But the person who learns to see change clearly becomes peaceful in a deeper way. They still love, they still care, they still feel, they still grieve, but they no longer confuse a passing form with the eternal truth. They no longer turn people into prisons. They no longer make memories into chains. They no longer worship what was only meant to be experienced, learned from, and released. Attachment makes temporary things feel permanent, but wisdom reminds you that only the soul's truth is permanent. Everything else is a guest. Some guests stay for years. Some stay for a season. Some stay only long enough to awaken a part of you that was sleeping. Welcome them with grace, learn from them with humility, love them with sincerity, but do not hand them the key to your happiness. Because when you stop demanding forever from what was only meant for a chapter, your heart becomes lighter. You stop chasing yesterday. You stop fearing tomorrow. You stop forcing people to remain the same. You stop breaking yourself against the natural flow of life. And slowly, quietly, beautifully, you begin to understand that peace was never found by making temporary things permanent. Peace was found by becoming rooted in what change can never touch. Lesson 3. Attachment turns love into fear. The Vedas teach that true love and attachment are not the same thing, even though most people confuse them. This confusion is responsible for an enormous amount of suffering. What many people call love is often fear in disguise. It begins innocently. You care for someone deeply. You enjoy their presence. You feel connected to them. Their happiness matters to you. Their voice brings comfort. Their existence adds color to your life. There is nothing wrong with this. In fact, it is part of the beauty of being human. But then something changes. Slowly, almost invisibly, love begins to transform into attachment. You stop appreciating their presence and start depending on it. You stop enjoying their affection and start needing it. You stop sharing your happiness with them and start building your happiness on them. And the moment this happens, fear enters the relationship. The Vedic sages observed that wherever attachment exists, fear follows closely behind. If you become attached to someone's presence, you begin fearing their absence. If you become attached to someone's attention, you begin fearing their distance. If you become attached to someone's love, you begin fearing their change of heart. If you become attached to someone's approval, you begin fearing their rejection. This is why attachment steals happiness. It takes something beautiful and fills it with anxiety. At first, you simply care. Then you worry. Then you overthink. Then you become restless. Then your peace depends on what another person does, says, feels, or decides. Without realizing it, your emotional world is no longer under your control. The Vedas warn that this is one of the most dangerous forms of bondage, because it feels like love while creating suffering. A person may wake up thinking about someone, sleep thinking about someone, check for messages constantly, analyze every word, replay every conversation, imagine every possible outcome, fear every sign of distance. And all the while, they call this love. But wisdom asks a difficult question. If something is destroying your peace every day, is it truly love? Or has attachment taken over? The sages taught that love expands the heart, while attachment traps the heart. Love creates freedom. Attachment creates dependency. Love brings gratitude. Attachment creates fear of loss. Love allows another person to be themselves. Attachment tries to control them, shape them, and hold them tightly because it is terrified of letting go. Think about how many people suffer, not because someone left them, but because they spent months or years fearing that person might leave. The suffering often begins long before the actual loss occurs. Attachment forces the mind to live in imaginary futures. It keeps asking, what if they leave? What if they stop caring? What if they find someone else? What if I lose them? The tragedy is that these fears slowly poison the very relationship the person is trying to protect. Instead of being present, they become anxious. Instead of trusting, they become suspicious. Instead of appreciating, they become demanding. Instead of loving, they become afraid. The Vedic sages compared attachment to holding sand in a closed fist. The tighter you squeeze, the faster the sand slips away. In the same way, the more desperately you try to hold on to someone, the more fear enters your heart. And the more fear enters your heart, the less peace remains. One of the deepest forms of suffering occurs when a person makes another human being the center of their emotional universe. Every mood begins depending on that person. Every hope depends on that person. Every dream depends on that person. Every moment of happiness depends on that person. This creates enormous pressure. No human being was meant to carry the weight of another person's entire happiness. No relationship can remain healthy when one person becomes the source of the other's identity. The Vedas teach that when you place another person on a pedestal, you eventually place yourself beneath them. Their attention becomes your reward. Their silence becomes your punishment. Their approval becomes your validation. Their rejection becomes your destruction. This is not love. This is emotional dependence. And emotional dependence is one of attachment's favorite disguises. The sages understood that attachment often begins because people are trying to fill an inner emptiness. Instead of building a strong relationship with themselves, They search for someone else to complete them. Instead of finding peace within, they try to borrow peace from another person. But borrowed peace is fragile. The moment the source disappears, the peace disappears too. That is why the Vedas repeatedly direct the seeker back toward their own soul. They teach that relationships become healthier when they are built upon wholeness rather than neediness. A person who feels complete within themselves can love deeply without becoming a prisoner. They can care deeply without losing their balance. They can enjoy another person's presence without becoming terrified of their absence. This does not mean they never feel pain. It means pain does not destroy them. When attachment rules the heart, every disappointment feels like the end of the world. When wisdom rules the heart, disappointment still hurts, but it does not erase inner peace. The Vedic path teaches that the strongest love is not possessive. It does not say you belong to me. It says I appreciate your presence while understanding that life is always changing. It does not say without you I am nothing. It says I value you deeply, but my soul remains whole. This kind of love is rare because it requires tremendous inner maturity. Most people are willing to learn how to love others, but very few are willing to learn how to remain centered while loving others. That is the secret. The goal is not to stop loving. The goal is to stop losing yourself. The sages understood that attachment turns love into fear, because attachment always focuses on losing. It keeps asking what might disappear tomorrow. Wisdom focuses on gratitude. It appreciates what exists today. Attachment says, how do I keep this forever? Wisdom says, how do I honor this while it is here? Attachment says, what if they leave? Wisdom says, I will appreciate them today. Attachment says, my happiness depends on them. Wisdom says, my happiness comes from within, and I choose to share it. This shift changes everything. Suddenly, relationships become lighter, the mind becomes calmer, fear becomes weaker, and love becomes purer. Because the moment you stop making another person responsible for your happiness, you stop living in constant fear of losing them. The Vedas leave us with a profound truth. The more attached you become, the more fearful you become. The more fearful you become, the more your happiness slips away. But when you learn to love without attachment, something extraordinary happens. You stop chasing, you stop controlling, you stop begging, you stop fearing every change. And for the first time, you discover a love that does not steal your peace, it protects it. That is the difference between attachment and wisdom. One creates fear, the other creates freedom. Lesson 4. Attachment feeds the ego and slowly steals your soul's freedom. The Vedas teach that attachment does not survive on love alone. Hidden beneath many attachments is something far more powerful and far more dangerous, the ego. This is why attachment often hurts far more than it should. The pain is not only coming from the heart, it is also coming from the ego's desperate need to possess, control, and be validated. Most people believe they are suffering because they love someone deeply. Sometimes that is true. But many times, a large part of the suffering comes from the ego being unable to accept that life is not following its plans. The ego creates a story about how things should happen. It decides who should stay, who should choose you, how people should behave, how relationships should unfold, and what your future should look like. Then, when reality moves in a different direction, the ego feels attacked. The ego whispers, how could they leave me? The ego whispers, how could they choose someone else? The ego whispers, after everything I did, how could they forget me? The ego whispers, I deserved a different ending. The ego whispers, I cannot accept this. And because the voice of the ego sounds so personal, most people mistake it for the voice of their soul. The Vedic sages spent centuries observing the human mind and discovered that the ego has a remarkable ability to disguise itself as love. It convinces people that they are simply caring deeply when in reality they are becoming possessive. It convinces them that they are being loyal when they are actually becoming dependent. It convinces them that they are protecting a relationship when they are secretly trying to control it. This is where attachment becomes extremely dangerous. Love allows another soul to be free. The ego wants ownership. Love appreciates. The ego demands. Love accepts reality. The ego fights reality. Love says, I care for you. The ego says, you belong to me. These differences may appear small at first, but they create completely different experiences of life. When love guides the heart, peace remains. When ego guides the heart, suffering grows. The Vedas compare attachment to wrapping chains around something beautiful because you are afraid it may leave. The tighter the chains become, the less freedom exists. Eventually, both the one holding the chains and the one being held begin suffering. This is why attachment creates so much emotional exhaustion. The ego is constantly trying to secure what cannot be permanently secured. It wants guarantees in a world built upon change. It wants certainty in a world filled with uncertainty. It wants permanence in a world where everything moves. And because life refuses to obey these demands, the ego remains in a constant state of frustration. Many people spend years carrying emotional pain that was never caused entirely by another person. Much of the pain comes from fighting reality itself. Reality says the relationship has changed. The ego says it should not have changed. Reality says the chapter is over. The ego says it should continue. Reality says the person chose a different path. The ego says they should have chosen mine. Reality says let go. The ego says hold tighter. This inner conflict becomes a source of endless suffering. The sages understood that one of the clearest signs of attachment is when a person becomes unable to accept what already exists. They keep negotiating with reality in their mind. They replay old conversations. They imagine different endings. They create fantasies about reconciliation. They wait for people to become who they used to be. They remain emotionally trapped in situations that have already ended. All because the ego cannot accept that life moved in a different direction than expected. The Vedas teach that the ego is deeply attached to identity. This is why attachment often becomes stronger when you make another person part of who you think you are. Instead of saying, this person is part of my life, the mind begins saying, this person is my life. Instead of saying, this relationship brings me happiness, the mind begins saying, this relationship is my happiness. Instead of saying, this dream matters to me, the mind begins saying, this dream defines me. The moment identity becomes attached to something external, fear automatically follows, because now losing that thing feels like losing yourself. A breakup feels like the death of identity. A rejection feels like the destruction of self-worth. A failure feels like proof of inadequacy. The ego turns temporary experiences into permanent judgments about who you are. This is one of the greatest illusions described in the Vedas. You are not your relationship. You are not your success. You are not your failure. You are not your reputation. You are not the person who stayed. You are not the person who left. You are not the dream that came true. You are not the dream that fell apart. Your deepest identity exists beneath all of these changing experiences. But attachment makes people forget this truth. It causes them to place pieces of their soul into things that were never meant to carry that responsibility. Then, when those things change or disappear, they feel as though part of themselves has been lost. The sages observed another painful effect of attachment driven by ego. It creates comparison. The attached mind constantly compares. Why are they happier than me? Why did they move on so quickly? Why did they choose someone else? Why does their life seem better? Why was I not enough? Why was I not chosen? Comparison is the ego's attempt to measure value through external circumstances, but this measurement is always flawed. The Vedas teach that every soul walks a unique path. Your value cannot be measured by another person's choices. Your worth cannot be measured by another person's opinion. Your destiny cannot be measured by another person's journey, yet attachment keeps dragging the mind into comparison because the ego desperately seeks validation. The tragedy is that validation never fully satisfies the ego. Even when it receives what it wants, It quickly wants more. More attention, more reassurance, more proof, more certainty, more control. The hunger never ends. That is why the sages taught that peace cannot be found by feeding the ego. Peace is found by seeing through the ego. The moment you realize that many of your attachments are connected to identity rather than truth, something begins to shift. You stop asking, "How do I make them stay?" and begin asking, "Why am I afraid to be without them?" You stop asking, "How do I control the outcome?" and begin asking, "Why does my peace depend on this outcome?" You stop asking, "Why am I not enough?" and begin asking, "Who taught me that my worth depends on being chosen?" These questions are powerful because they expose the ego's hidden influence, and once the influence becomes visible, it begins losing its power. The Vedic sages never taught people to stop loving. They taught people to stop confusing attachment with love. Real love does not require ownership. Real love does not require control. Real love does not require losing yourself. Real love does not require making another person responsible for your happiness. Real love grows from inner fullness. Attachment grows from inner emptiness. This is why two people can experience the same relationship very differently. One person loves with freedom. The other loves with attachment. One appreciates. The other clings. One remains peaceful. The other remains fearful. One accepts change. The other fights reality. The relationship may appear identical from the outside, but internally they are living completely different experiences. The Vedas reveal that true freedom begins when you stop trying to possess what was only meant to be experienced. People enter your life. Some stay, some leave, some teach, some heal, some challenge, some awaken, but none of them were sent to replace your connection with your own soul. The moment you expect another person to become the foundation of your identity, attachment grows stronger. The moment you return to your inner center, attachment begins weakening, and this is where a profound transformation begins. You stop chasing people who are trying to leave. You stop forcing situations that no longer fit your path. You stop begging for what does not want to remain. You stop carrying emotional burdens that life is asking you to release. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally understand that your soul is too valuable to be chained to something temporary. The Vedas leave us with a powerful lesson. Attachment feeds the ego because the ego wants ownership, certainty, and control. But life was never designed to provide permanent ownership, complete certainty, or total control. The more you demand these things, the more you suffer. The more you release them, the more peace returns. Because true happiness begins the moment you stop asking the world to complete you and start remembering that your soul was already complete from the very beginning. Lesson 5. Attachment keeps you living in the past and steals the life happening right now. The Vedas teach that one of the greatest powers given to a human being is the ability to live consciously in the present moment. The present is where life exists. The present is where growth happens. The present is where peace can be experienced. The present is where the soul can connect with truth. Yet attachment has a strange and painful habit. It pulls a person away from the present and traps them inside what has already ended. Many people believe they are attached to a person, but often they are attached to a memory. They are attached to a version of someone that no longer exists. They are attached to old conversations, old promises, old feelings, old hopes, and old dreams. Their body continues moving through today, but their mind remains sitting in yesterday, and because their attention is trapped in the past, they become unable to fully experience the life unfolding before them. The Vedic sages observed that memory is a beautiful servant but a terrible master. Memories can teach wisdom. They can remind us of lessons. They can help us understand our journey. But when attachment takes control, memories stop being teachers and become prisons. The mind begins replaying them endlessly, searching for answers that no longer exist, searching for moments that cannot be relived, searching for people who have already changed. This is why attachment creates such deep emotional exhaustion. The person is not only carrying today's challenges, they are carrying yesterday's emotions as well. Every morning they wake up with old wounds. Every evening they sleep with old regrets. Every day they revisit conversations that happened months or years ago. Every day they imagine different endings. Every day they wonder what they should have said, what they should have done, what they could have changed. Without realizing it, they are spending their life feeding a chapter that has already ended. The Vedas warn that the mind becomes trapped whenever it refuses to accept what reality has already accepted. Life has moved forward, but the attached mind remains behind. Reality has changed, but the attached mind keeps negotiating with the past. Reality has closed a door, but the attached mind keeps standing outside that door, hoping it will reopen. This inner resistance becomes the source of enormous suffering. Many people think they are suffering because they lost someone, but often they are suffering because they refuse to stop reliving the loss. The event happened once. The mind repeats it 1,000 times. The pain occurred in a moment. The attachment keeps recreating it for years. The sages understood something most people never realize. The past gains power only when you keep feeding it your attention. Every time you replay an old memory, you strengthen its emotional hold over you. Every time you revisit an old wound without learning from it, you deepen the habit of suffering. Every time you compare today with yesterday, you weaken your ability to experience the present. This is why attachment steals happiness. It does not only steal the future, it steals today. A person may be surrounded by opportunities, blessings, and loving people, yet remain miserable because their mind is trapped in what once was. They cannot enjoy new relationships because they are comparing them to old ones. They cannot appreciate present blessings because they are grieving past losses. They cannot see new possibilities because they are staring at closed doors. Their life continues moving forward, but their consciousness remains anchored in the past. The Vedic sages compared this condition to carrying a corpse on your shoulders long after life has departed from it. The weight becomes heavier with every step, yet the person refuses to put it down because attachment convinces them that holding on is an act of love. But holding on to suffering is not love. Holding on to pain is not loyalty. Holding on to what has ended is not wisdom. True wisdom is knowing when a lesson has been learned and allowing the chapter to close. One of the most painful forms of attachment occurs when people become attached not to reality but to possibility. They are not grieving what actually existed. They are grieving what could have existed. They are attached to the future they imagined, the family they imagined, the relationship they imagined, the happiness they imagined, the version of life they created inside their mind. And because that imagined future never arrived, they remain trapped between reality and fantasy. The Vedas teach that attachment often hurts more because of imagination than because of reality itself. The mind creates a perfect version of what could have been. Then it compares real life against that fantasy. Real life can never compete. As a result, disappointment grows stronger. The person becomes emotionally attached not only to the past, but also to an illusion. This is why letting go feels so difficult. You are not only releasing what happened, you are also releasing what you hoped would happen. You are releasing dreams, expectations, possibilities, stories, imagined futures. And sometimes those imagined futures feel more real than reality itself. The sages understood that healing begins the moment you stop worshipping what might have been, the moment you stop asking life to return to an earlier version, the moment you stop demanding a different past, the moment you stop negotiating with reality, because reality cannot be changed through attachment. It can only be accepted through wisdom. The Vedas never taught people to erase memories. They taught people to transform their relationship with memories. A memory should become a source of understanding, not a source of imprisonment. A memory should help you grow, not prevent you from moving forward. A memory should become a lesson, not an identity. Many people have built entire identities around old pain. They introduce themselves to life, through their wounds. They define themselves through what happened to them. They see themselves as the rejected one, the abandoned one, the betrayed one, the forgotten one, the heartbroken one. And because they continue identifying with the wound never fully heals. The Vedas guide the seeker toward a different path. They ask you to remember that you are not your pain. You are not your loss. You are not your heartbreak. You are not the chapter that ended. You are the awareness that experienced those things and survived them. This distinction changes everything. Suddenly the past becomes smaller, not because it did not matter, but because it no longer defines who you are. The sages often reminded their disciples that every season has a purpose. Spring arrives and leaves. Summer arrives and leaves. Autumn arrives and leaves. Winter arrives and leaves. No season remains forever. Relationships follow the same law. Experiences follow the same law. Success follows the same law. Pain follows the same law. Everything moves. Everything changes. Everything teaches. Everything eventually passes. Attachment suffers because it wants one season to last forever. Wisdom understands that every season was meant to teach something before moving on. Think about how much suffering comes from expecting permanence in a temporary world. People want moments to last forever. Youth to last forever. Love to remain unchanged forever. Comfort to last forever. Yet the Vedas repeatedly remind us that change is not the enemy. Resistance to change is the enemy. The river remains beautiful because it flows. Life remains meaningful because it evolves. Growth remains possible because nothing stays the same. The attached mind sees change as loss. The wise mind sees change as part of existence. This does not mean the wise never grieve. They do. They feel deeply. They cry. They miss people. They experience heartbreak. But they do not build a permanent home inside temporary pain. They allow grief to pass through them rather than become their identity. This is one of the greatest forms of spiritual maturity, to honor what was, to appreciate what existed, to learn from what happened, and still move forward. Many people spend years waiting for closure from others. The Vedas teach that closure often comes from within, not from another conversation, not from another explanation, not from another apology, but from acceptance. The moment you accept that the past cannot return, something extraordinary happens. Energy returns, attention returns, life returns. The future becomes visible again. The present becomes meaningful again. The heart becomes lighter again, because all the energy that was trapped in yesterday becomes available for today. And that is where happiness begins returning. The Vedas leave us with a powerful truth. Attachment keeps you looking backward while life continues moving forward. The more you cling to what was, the less you experience what is. The more you worship old memories, the less you notice new blessings. But the moment you release the past from the throne of your heart, you create space for something new. New wisdom, new peace, new growth, new relationships, new opportunities, and most importantly, a new version of yourself. Because happiness does not live in yesterday. Happiness lives in the moment you finally stop chasing the past and start living the life that is waiting for you right now. Lesson 6. Attachment blocks your spiritual growth and keeps you repeating the same pain. The Vedas teach that nothing enters your life without carrying a lesson. Every relationship, every challenge, every disappointment, every success, every heartbreak, every desire, and every loss arrives with the potential to teach your soul something important. But attachment has a dangerous habit. It keeps a person so focused on what they lost that they never discover what they were meant to learn. This is why attachment can become one of the greatest obstacles to spiritual growth. It traps awareness at the level of the event and prevents it from reaching the level of wisdom. The attached mind keeps asking, "Why did this happen to me?" while the awakened mind eventually begins asking, "What was this trying to teach me?" The difference between these two questions is the difference between suffering and transformation. Most people spend years trapped inside the first question. Why did they leave? Why did they change? Why did they stop caring? Why was I rejected? Why was I not chosen? Why did life take this away from me? The mind circles around these questions endlessly, searching for answers that often bring little peace. Even when answers arrive, attachment finds new questions. Even when explanations are given, attachment finds new reasons to suffer. The cycle continues because the attached mind is focused on the loss, not the lesson. The Vedic sages understood that life repeats lessons until they are learned. If a person refuses to understand the deeper meaning behind an experience, that experience often returns in another form. Different faces may appear, different situations may arise, different stories may unfold, but the emotional pattern remains strangely familiar. A person keeps choosing people who do not value them. A person keeps becoming dependent on approval. A person keeps sacrificing their peace to be accepted. A person keeps attaching their self-worth to relationships. A person keeps abandoning themselves for others. Years pass, people change, circumstances change, yet the same suffering continues. The sages would say that the soul is not being punished, the soul is being taught. Life is patiently repeating a lesson that has not yet been understood. This is one of the reasons attachment is so dangerous. It keeps attention focused on the wrong thing. Instead of learning, the person obsesses. Instead of growing, the person clings. Instead of awakening, the person resists. Instead of transforming, the person repeats. The lesson waits patiently in the background, but attachment refuses to look at it. Imagine a student sitting in the same classroom year after year because they refuse to learn the material. The classroom is not the problem. The teacher is not the problem. The lesson itself is not the problem. The problem is the refusal to understand what is being taught. According to the Vedas, many people approach life in exactly this way. They keep experiencing similar forms of suffering because they keep refusing to learn what suffering is trying to reveal. The sages observed that every attachment exposes a hidden weakness inside the mind. Some attachments reveal fear of loneliness. Some reveal fear of rejection. Some reveal insecurity. Some reveal a desperate need for validation. Some reveal lack of self-worth. Some reveal the inability to trust life. Some reveal the inability to be alone with oneself. This is why painful experiences can become powerful spiritual teachers. Not because suffering itself is sacred, but because suffering often reveals what comfort hides. When everything is going well, people rarely examine themselves deeply. When attachment breaks, however, the hidden parts of the mind become visible. The fears appear, the insecurities appear, the emotional dependencies appear, the illusions appear. Suddenly, a person begins seeing things they could not see before. This is where spiritual growth becomes possible, but only if they are willing to learn. The attached mind sees heartbreak as proof that life is unfair. The awakened mind asks what the heartbreak is revealing. The attached mind sees rejection as proof of worthlessness. The awakened mind asks why self-worth was placed in another person's hands. The attached mind sees loss as punishment. The awakened mind asks what attachment is being exposed. This shift in perspective changes everything. Pain stops being merely pain. Pain becomes information. Pain becomes guidance. Pain becomes a teacher. The Vedas never glorify suffering for its own sake. Instead, they teach that suffering becomes meaningful when it leads to awareness. Without awareness, pain is simply pain. With awareness, pain becomes wisdom. One of the deepest truths discovered by the sages is that attachment often forms around the very areas where spiritual growth is needed most. Life has an extraordinary ability to reveal our weaknesses through our attachments. A person who fears abandonment becomes attached to people. A person who lacks self-worth becomes attached to validation. A person who fears uncertainty becomes attached to control. A person who fears loneliness becomes attached to companionship. A person who fears failure becomes attached to achievement. The attachment itself becomes a mirror. It reflects something hidden inside the individual. Yet most people stare at the object of attachment instead of looking into the mirror. They focus entirely on the person, the relationship, the outcome. the dream, the goal. Meanwhile, the deeper lesson remains unnoticed. The sages taught that true spiritual maturity begins when a person stops asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and begins asking, "What is this showing me about myself?" That question has the power to transform suffering into growth. Suddenly, every disappointment becomes an opportunity for understanding. Every attachment becomes a source of insight. Every challenge becomes part of awakening. The Vedas describe life as a journey of remembering who you truly are. Attachment slows this process because it convinces you that fulfillment exists outside yourself. It tells you that happiness will arrive when a certain person stays, when a certain desire is fulfilled, when a certain dream becomes reality, when a certain outcome is achieved. But spiritual growth begins when you realize that no external circumstance can permanently complete what must be discovered within. This realization can be painful because it means taking responsibility. It means acknowledging that no one else can do your inner work for you. No relationship can heal every insecurity. No achievement can permanently erase self-doubt. No amount of attention can permanently cure loneliness. No amount of success can permanently create self-worth. The work must happen within, and attachment often delays that work. The sages understood another important truth. Many people become attached to suffering itself. They become attached to their wounds, their stories, their disappointments, their victimhood, their heartbreak. Their pain becomes familiar. Their suffering becomes part of their identity. Without realizing it, they begin protecting the very thing they want to escape. They continue telling the same story, revisiting the same wound, reliving the same emotions, strengthening the same identity. The attachment is no longer only to a person or situation. The attachment has expanded into suffering itself. This is one of the most subtle forms of bondage, because now letting go feels like losing a part of who they are. The Vedas challenge this illusion directly. They remind us that we are not our wounds. We are not our heartbreaks. We are not our disappointments. We are not our suffering. We are the awareness that experiences these things and grows beyond them. This truth is liberating because it means no painful chapter has the authority to define your identity forever. The sages taught that every attachment eventually asks the same question: will you remain asleep inside this experience, or will you awaken through it? That question appears again and again throughout life. Some people spend decades repeating the same lessons because they refuse to answer it. Others use pain as a doorway into deeper wisdom. The difference is not the amount of suffering. The difference is the willingness to learn. When spiritual growth begins, attachments start losing their power. Not because the person becomes cold, not because they stop loving, not because they stop caring, but because they stop seeking completion through temporary things. They stop expecting the world to provide what only inner awakening can provide. They stop making others responsible for their peace. They stop building their identity around what can be lost. And slowly something beautiful happens. Freedom begins replacing dependence. Understanding begins replacing confusion. Wisdom begins replacing obsession. Peace begins replacing fear. The person still experiences relationships, still experiences dreams, still experiences joy and sorrow, but they move through life differently. They learn, they grow, they awaken, they allow experiences to teach them rather than imprison them. The Vedas leave us with a profound lesson. Attachment blocks spiritual growth because it keeps your attention fixed on what happened rather than what can be learned. It keeps you staring at the closed door while the lesson stands quietly beside you, waiting to be noticed. The moment you turn toward the lesson, everything begins changing. Pain becomes wisdom, loss becomes understanding, heartbreak becomes transformation, and what once felt like the end of your happiness becomes the beginning of your awakening, because every attachment carries a lesson, and every lesson understood becomes a step closer to freedom. Lesson 7. Freedom begins when you love without losing yourself. The Vedas teach that the highest form of love is not attachment, possession, control, dependence, or emotional bondage. The highest form of love is freedom. This is one of the most misunderstood truths in human life. because many people grow up believing that love means holding on tightly, sacrificing endlessly, tolerating everything, and making another person the center of their existence. They believe that the more they suffer for someone, the more they love them. They believe that losing themselves is proof of devotion. They believe that constant longing, fear, and emotional dependence are signs of a deep connection. But the Vedic sages saw something very different. They observed that whenever love causes a person to abandon their inner peace, abandon their self-respect, abandon their purpose, abandon their growth, and abandon their connection with their own soul, that love has already become attachment, and attachment, no matter how beautiful it appears at first, eventually becomes a source of suffering. This is why the final lesson is perhaps the most important lesson of all. The goal is not to stop loving. The goal is to learn how to love without losing yourself. Most people never learn this. They know how to become attached. They know how to become dependent. They know how to become obsessed. They know how to chase. They know how to wait. They know how to sacrifice their peace for someone else's attention. But very few people know how to remain connected to themselves while caring deeply for another person. The sages taught that the moment your happiness becomes completely dependent on another person's presence, you have unknowingly handed away your freedom. The moment your peace depends entirely upon how someone treats you, you have surrendered your inner power. The moment your self-worth depends upon whether someone chooses you, notices you, loves you, or stays with you, you have built your identity on unstable ground, and unstable ground can never provide lasting peace. Think about how many people spend years trying to earn love. They change themselves, hide parts of themselves, lower their standards, ignore their intuition, accept behavior that wounds them, remain silent when they should speak, stay where they should leave, wait when they should move forward, all because they are afraid of losing someone. The Vedas would ask a painful question: if keeping someone requires losing yourself, what exactly are you protecting? Because a relationship that costs you your soul is far too expensive. A connection that requires you to betray your inner truth is not bringing you closer to happiness. It is taking you further away from it. The sages understood that one of the greatest tragedies in life is not losing another person. It is losing yourself while trying to keep another person. Many people do not realize this is happening until years later. They wake up one day exhausted, emotionally drained, disconnected from their own desires, disconnected from their own purpose, disconnected from their own identity. Everything in their life revolves around another person's choices. Their mood depends on someone else's behavior. Their confidence depends on someone else's approval. Their future depends on someone else's decisions. Without realizing it, they have stopped living their own life. They have become a prisoner inside someone else's story. The Vedic path offers another way, a way of loving that does not require self-destruction, a way of caring that does not require emotional slavery, a way of connecting that does not require losing your freedom. This form of love begins with inner wholeness. The sages taught that before you can truly love another person, you must first learn how to stand peacefully within yourself. Not because you reject relationships, not because you reject love, but because love becomes healthier when it grows from completeness rather than emptiness. An empty person seeks someone to complete them. A whole person seeks someone to share life with. An empty person says, "Without you, I am nothing." A whole person says, "I value you deeply, but I remain myself." An empty person clings. A whole person appreciates. An empty person fears every change. A whole person understands that life moves and changes naturally. This distinction changes everything, because when you become emotionally whole, relationships stop being sources of survival. They become sources of connection. You stop needing people to rescue you. You stop needing people to validate you. You stop needing people to prove your worth. You stop needing people to fill every empty space inside your heart. Instead, you begin relating from strength rather than need. This is one of the greatest freedoms described in the Vedas: to love deeply while remaining inwardly free, to care sincerely while remaining rooted within yourself, to give generously while maintaining your dignity, to appreciate another person without making them responsible for your happiness. The sages often compared attachment to holding a bird inside a cage. The attached person believes that keeping the bird trapped will prevent loss, but the cage also prevents freedom. Eventually, both the bird and the owner suffer. True love, however, allows the bird to fly, not because it wants separation, but because it understands that freedom is part of genuine connection. In the same way, spiritual love does not attempt to control another person's journey. It does not demand ownership. It does not demand guarantees. It does not demand permanence. It appreciates what is present while accepting that everything in life remains subject to change. This acceptance is not weakness. It is wisdom. Many people think letting go means giving up. The Vedas teach something far deeper. Sometimes letting go is the highest expression of love. Sometimes letting go means respecting reality. Sometimes letting go means respecting another person's path. Sometimes letting go means respecting your own peace. Sometimes letting go means trusting life enough to stop forcing what no longer belongs. The attached mind fears letting go because it believes letting go means losing everything. The awakened mind understands that letting go often creates space for something greater. Greater wisdom, greater peace, greater self-respect, greater growth, greater freedom. One of the most beautiful teachings of the Vedas is that every relationship should bring you closer to your true self, not further away from it. If a relationship constantly disconnects you from your peace, your purpose, your values, and your inner truth, something is wrong. If caring for someone requires abandoning yourself, something is wrong. If love constantly demands the sacrifice of your dignity, something is wrong. Because real love does not ask you to become less of yourself. Real love encourages you to become more of yourself. The sages observed that people often fear being alone because they have never learned how to be at peace with themselves. This fear becomes the foundation of attachment. They stay in unhealthy situations because loneliness feels frightening. They tolerate disrespect because separation feels unbearable. They remain trapped because uncertainty feels terrifying. But spiritual growth changes this relationship with solitude. A person who learns to enjoy their own company becomes much harder to control. A person who learns to stand peacefully alone becomes much harder to manipulate. A person who learns to find happiness within becomes much harder to enslave through attachment. This does not mean they stop loving others. It means they stop fearing their own presence. And once that fear disappears, attachment begins losing its strongest weapon. The sages taught that true freedom arrives when you realize that your happiness is an inner responsibility, not another person's responsibility, not society's responsibility, not circumstances' responsibility. Yours. This realization is empowering because it returns control to where it belongs. No longer does your happiness rise and fall according to another person's moods. No longer does your peace depend on external conditions. No longer does your self-worth depend on approval. You become rooted in something deeper, something more stable, something that cannot be taken away as easily as external circumstances. The Vedas call this inner stability a form of spiritual wealth, because once you possess it, no loss can completely destroy you. No rejection can completely define you. No ending can completely break you. You may still feel pain. You may still grieve. You may still miss people, but you remain connected to yourself, and that connection becomes a source of immense strength. The attached person says, "Please stay, because without you I cannot be happy." The awakened person says, "I value you deeply, but my happiness does not belong entirely in your hands." The attached person says, "You complete me." The awakened person says, "I was whole before we met, and I choose to share my wholeness with you." The attached person says, "I cannot live without you." The awakened person says, "I may grieve your absence, but I will not abandon myself." This is the freedom the Vedas speak of. Not freedom from relationships, not freedom from love, freedom from dependence, freedom from fear, freedom from emotional slavery, freedom from the illusion that another person must carry the weight of your entire happiness. And when this freedom arrives, something extraordinary happens. Love becomes lighter, peace becomes deeper, fear becomes weaker, the heart becomes stronger, life becomes richer, because you are no longer loving from emptiness. You are loving from fullness. You are no longer loving from desperation. You are loving from abundance. You are no longer loving because you need someone to save you. You are loving because your soul has become strong enough to share its light. The Vedas leave us with a timeless truth. Attachment asks, how can I keep this forever? Love asks, how can I honor this while it is here? Attachment fears loss. Love embraces gratitude. Attachment creates chains. Love creates freedom. And the moment you learn to love without losing yourself, you discover something remarkable. The happiness you spent years searching for in other people was never truly hidden inside them. It was quietly waiting inside you all along. The day you stop making others responsible for your peace is the day your freedom begins. The day you stop abandoning yourself for love is the day real love begins. And the day you learn to love without attachment is the day happiness finally stops slipping through your hands and starts living within your soul. The Vedas warned that attachment is one of the most beautiful illusions and one of the most painful prisons a human being can experience. It does not arrive looking like suffering. It arrives looking like love. It arrives looking like devotion. It arrives looking like loyalty, hope, longing, and deep emotional connection. But over time, attachment quietly takes your happiness and places it into someone else's hands. It convinces you that your peace depends on what they do, what they say, whether they stay, whether they leave, whether they choose you, or whether they remember you. And that is where suffering begins. Because the moment your happiness depends on something outside yourself, fear enters your heart. Fear of loss, fear of change, fear of rejection, fear of being forgotten, fear of being alone. The more attached you become, the more afraid you become, and the more afraid you become, the further you drift from the peace your soul has been searching for all along. The ancient sages understood a truth that most people spend years learning through pain. They understood that happiness can never be permanently built on anything that can be taken away. People can change, relationships can end, dreams can evolve, circumstances can shift, life can move in directions you never expected. If your peace depends entirely on these things, then your peace will always remain fragile. But there is something deeper than all of this. There is something within you that existed before every attachment and will remain after every attachment. There is something within you that does not become smaller when someone leaves, does not become worthless when someone rejects you, and does not become broken when life changes its plans. That something is your true self, that something is the soul. And the Vedas teach that the soul was never meant to live as a prisoner of attachment. It was meant to live in freedom. This does not mean you stop loving people. It does not mean you stop caring. It does not mean you become cold, distant, or emotionally closed. It means you learn to love without surrendering your identity. You learn to care without becoming dependent. You learn to appreciate without becoming attached. You learn to let people be part of your life without making them the source of your life. That is real strength. That is real wisdom. That is real freedom. Remember, attachment says, I need you to be happy. Wisdom says, I choose to share my happiness with you. Attachment says, without you, I am incomplete. Wisdom says, I was whole before we met, and I remain whole today. Attachment says, please never leave. Wisdom says, I will cherish your presence, but I will not lose myself if life changes. This is the transformation the Vedas invite us to make. To stop chasing what is temporary and reconnect with what is eternal. To stop clinging to what is changing and root ourselves in what is unchanging. To stop searching for our worth in the hands of others and remember the value that already exists within us. Because the truth is, the people you lost were never your happiness. The dreams that ended were never your happiness. The memories that faded were never your happiness. The happiness you were searching for was never hidden inside another person. It was hidden beneath your attachment. And the moment attachment begins to fall away, that happiness begins to reveal itself again. So if there is someone you cannot stop thinking about, someone you cannot stop chasing, someone whose absence still controls your emotions, ask yourself one final question. Am I holding on to them because I love them, or because I am afraid to return to myself? Because sometimes the greatest act of love is not holding on. Sometimes the greatest act of love is releasing what no longer belongs to your journey and choosing to come home to your own soul. The Vedas leave us with a timeless reminder. What is meant for you will not require you to abandon your peace. What is meant for you will not demand that you lose yourself, and what is truly yours will never need to be chained. So let go of what is stealing your happiness. Let go of what is keeping your heart trapped in yesterday. Let go of what is asking you to sacrifice your soul for temporary comfort, and return to the place where true peace has always lived. Return to awareness. Return to wisdom. Return to yourself, because the person who learns to release attachment does not lose love. They finally discover a love that no loss can take away.